Luis fell in love with my roommate. He brought her along to confront his parents in public, announcing his desire to break off the engagement between me and him. Pointing at me, he told both sets of parents, "I've never liked her, and marrying her would only disgust me." That was also the last day I liked Luis. Even after I was bullied, he continued to treat me coldly. Later, when another guy confessed to me, he did everything he could to stop me from being with anyone else. Holding the childhood marriage contract he had written for me in his hand, he said, "You clearly promised that you'd marry only me when you grew up." Chapter 1. When Luis was arguing with his parents while bringing my roommate with him, I had just arrived. I stomped the snow off my shoes and was about to push the door open. I've already said, I never agreed to that ridiculous engagement. The sound of a boy's mocking laughter made me pause my movement. That was something both sets of parents arranged when you were little. "Are you bringing this girl here now to embarrass us?" Through the gap in the door, I saw Luis arguing with his father. My parents sat quietly on the side, their expressions grim. "This is my girlfriend," Luis declared, holding Naomi, my roommate's hand, asserting his claim. Luis's father's face turned red with anger. "You can only marry Luciana. You don't have a choice." My hand trembled, accidentally pushing the door open. All eyes turned to me. Luis's cold gaze swept over me as he turned to his parents. Speaking firmly, "I've never liked her, and marrying her would only disgust me." After speaking, he didn't wait for a response and left with Naomi. His gaze indifferently brushed past me. Behind me were the hurried apologies from Luis's parents and the barely restrained fury of my father, who seemed ready to chase after Luis and punch him. I only stared at the backs of the two leaving. Luis and I had grown up together for so many years. He had never denied our engagement to anyone. He would even laugh along when people joked about it. I thought he liked me, just as I liked him. Chapter 2. That night, after 2 hours of comforting from my parents, they finally let me go to sleep. My mom called the school to excuse me from classes, and I didn't return to the dorm. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the phone on my bedside table lit up. It was a message from Luis. "I'm downstairs at your house. Come down. We need to talk." I remembered the words he said today. My childhood friend, who had wounded me deeply, just to be with another girl. That night, I didn't go downstairs, but I didn't sleep well either. I had a fragmented dream. A young Luis sat at his desk, carefully writing something. After a while, he finished, jumped off the chair, and ran over to young me. "Luciana, don't cry. You'll marry Big Brother Luis when you grow up." His soft little hand stuffed the marriage contract he had made into mine, his gaze clear and sincere. "Big Brother Luis will protect Luciana in the future." The moon finally broke through the last of the clouds, and the light that shone through dazzled my eyes. Half awake, I wiped away the tears from the corners of my eyes. Chapter 3. Early the next morning, on my way to school, Luis managed to block my path. "Leaving at this hour again? You didn't have breakfast, did you?" The familiar tone of his voice made me pause for a moment. Luis handed a bag of prepared breakfast to me. "Luciana, I didn't mean to target you with what I said yesterday. I was just angry. That's why I said those things." I stepped back, avoiding the breakfast bag. "No need. Eating your breakfast would only disgust me." Luis withdrew his hand, staring at me steadily. His voice deepened. "So, after cursing me, you feel better? Luciana, I hope you won't trouble Naomi. She didn't do anything wrong. It was me who liked her first." I have to say, Luis was quite foresight in saying this, but it was Naomi who started the provocation. Luis and I arrived at school one after the other. As soon as I entered the classroom and sat in my seat, Naomi came over holding a cup of milk. Her voice was neither too loud nor too soft, just enough to rise above the faint reading noises in the class. In that instant, everyone's eyes turned toward us. "Luciana, please have some milk. Can you forgive me?" I lowered my eyes, glancing at the milk before looking at her. "What did you do wrong that you need my forgiveness?" Naomi put the milk on my desk, her eyes slightly red. "I shouldn't have accepted Luis's WeChat friend request. I didn't know back then that he was your childhood friend." Her voice choked slightly as she tugged on my sleeve. "Luciana, Please don't be mad at me, okay? As long as you're not mad at me, I can give Luis back to you. I was about to respond, but another voice cut in. It was Naomi's good friend. She let out a mocking laugh. Speaking up for Naomi. Naomi, do you really need to apologize? Luciana and Luis are just friends, right? It's not like you stole her boyfriend, so what's there to apologize for? And also, Luciana, can you stop acting so high and mighty with that princess attitude of yours? The two of them sang in harmony, pushing the scene to its peak. You two are playing the good cop, bad cop game, right? I said as I pulled Naomi's hand away. Even though I didn't use any force, she still stumbled to the side with a cry of alarm. Ah! She bumped into my desk, spilling the hot milk all over herself. That's when Luis walked in. Naomi, are you hurt? He took off his coat, covering Naomi, his face full of worry. It's okay, Luis. The onlookers around us all cast accusatory glances at me. What are you all looking at? She bumped into it herself. I found it a bit funny. Luis heard it, but all his attention was still on Naomi. I'll take you to the nurse's office now. Just bear with it a little. He picked Naomi up in his arms, looking straight ahead as he left. From beginning to end, he treated me like I was invisible. In the afternoon, Naomi's friend, still angry, decided to get back at me on Naomi's behalf. After I finished boiling water and came out, I ran into her head-on. She deliberately bumped into me, spilling the water from her cup onto me, then pushed me down for good measure. Oops, sorry. That wasn't on purpose either. She shrugged indifferently and walked away. I looked up and met Luis's eyes from a distance. He just looked down at me. His expression was so cold it felt like he was looking at a stranger. Just before the bell rang, I walked into the classroom, drenched. In my hand was a bottle, filled with warm, light yellow liquid. Before anyone could react, I opened the cap. The liquid splashed down, drenching the girl completely. I did it on purpose, and I'm not planning to apologize. She screamed as she stood up. What is this? What did you pour on me? I pulled at the corner of my lips, offering no explanation. It wasn't until this escalated that I clarified things to the homeroom teacher. It was just a bottle of hot water, plus 2 tea leaves. Chapter 4. After this incident, I was isolated by the whole class. Everyone avoided me. I even started doubting myself. Did I do something wrong? If it was the right thing, then why was I the one being ostracized? Meanwhile, Luis and Naomi were now famous as the class's scholar couple. The day they went public with their relationship was also the day I confessed my feelings to Luis. On Friday night, the class is having a gathering. Are you coming? The class president hesitated for a long time, and after asking everyone else, finally came over to ask me tentatively. I put on a calm facade, but the hand hidden under the desk couldn't help but clench tightly. I'll come, I thought. Maybe I wasn't that rejected after all. In the club, everyone sat together playing Truth or Dare. The bottle spun and landed on Luis. Someone grinned wickedly, asking the question, Luis, if both your childhood sweetheart Luciana and your rumored girlfriend Naomi fell into the water at the same time, who would you save? At that moment, I didn't think that it would become a prophecy. Luis and Naomi sat directly across from me. The air froze for an instant. I kept my gaze lowered, staring at the juice in front of me, unblinking. I knew I could make up an excuse to leave the room, but strangely enough, I didn't move. Across from me, Luis let out a soft chuckle. His tone was slow. What do you mean rumored? This is my girlfriend. Didn't I tell you all? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him put his arm around Naomi's shoulders. He asked, Naomi, do you know how to swim? I can't swim, the girl said a little bashfully. Luis sighed gently, his words full of affection. Then if you fell into the sea, I guess I'd have to swim while holding you the entire way. He didn't answer the question directly, but the answer was obvious, and rightly so. Naomi was his girlfriend. It wasn't wrong to save his girlfriend first. I closed my eyes slightly, hiding the bitterness in my eyes. Everyone around was teasing how even a scholar like Luis could act like this in a relationship. I made my breathing as light as possible, trying to lower my presence as much as possible, afraid of attracting those pitying, mocking glances. But Naomi didn't seem to want to let me go so easily. When it was my turn, she smiled innocently, gently asking, "Luciana, is there someone you like here tonight? Even someone you used to like counts." She said the cruelest words in a playful tone, making everyone think she was just joking around. "If you lie, your whole family won't die a good death." It felt like I was backed into a corner. If I stood up now and made a scene, I'd probably be permanently ostracized. I would be looked at strangely by my classmates. I raised my eyes slightly, meeting Naomi's gaze. "There is." As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt Luis's sharp glance at me. Naomi smiled and hooked her arm around Luis's. "Got it." In the past, I would have felt utterly humiliated by this kind of situation, but after admitting that I had liked Luis, the emotion seemed to drift far away from me, like a light breeze that carried away the last bit of complicated feelings I had for Luis. The wind passed, leaving no trace on the water. At 17, I let go of a 3-year crush. I finally knew for sure that I didn't like Luis anymore. Chapter 5. Luciana. As the party ended, just as I was about to leave, Luis called out to me. He approached, his expression complicated. "Today, when you said the person you liked," he paused for 2 seconds before continuing, "was it me?" To be honest, I no longer felt any affection for the boy in front of me. "Yes," I added, "but it was in the past. When you pointed at me and said marrying me would make you sick, that's when I decided to stop liking you. Besides, you have a girlfriend now. I've really moved on." Luis pressed his lips together, silent. "I never meant to hurt you on purpose. I've always seen you as a sister." I no longer wanted to hear his empty words. "Luciana, I'll make it up to you." Although I immediately refused, and showed through my actions, I genuinely wanted to stay away from him and his girlfriend. But Luis wouldn't listen at all, doing a lot of pointless things to fill his guilt. He insisted on bringing me breakfast. Even though I threw it back at him every time, he would occasionally show his care and concern. Naomi, unable to see my attempts to avoid him, just assumed I wanted to take Luis back. She began causing trouble, again and again. The day before the mock exam results came out, Naomi was called to the office alone. She came back crying at her desk. Rumors began to spread around the class that she had cheated in the exam, whether it was Luis or her friends. Almost no one believed Naomi would cheat. After all, she was right behind Luis as the second in the grade. How could Naomi, the scholar, cheat? That note they found couldn't possibly belong to her. Exactly. Naomi isn't that kind of person. I didn't pay much attention to it, but I knew I did well in the exam this time. After comparing answers, I realized I made far fewer mistakes than before. After the results came out, I hadn't had much time to be happy before Luis blocked my way after school. "Luciana, did you do it?" I was confused. "What?" Framing Naomi for cheating. "Wasn't it you? Weren't you the one who put that little note in her papers?" He questioned coldly, step by step pressing me. Why would I bother? I scoffed. "Do you really think I care about her enough to cause trouble?" Luis stared at me. "Then why did you score 27 points higher than last time? Why couldn't I have done it on my own?" I had reached my limit. "Luis, stop being so paranoid." His expression turned unreadable. Then he sneered. "Luciana, how did you become like this?" Framing people, refusing to repent. Luis shook his head, his eyes filled with disappointment. "Is this how you were brought up?" I let out an angry laugh, just about to retort. Luis lit up his phone, showing me a surveillance video. After the exam papers were handed in and before the school day ended, I was the only one who had entered the office. This was Naomi's plan. The cheat sheet was deliberately placed in her papers. She knew the answers, which was why no one believed she cheated. And with this video, I was instantly blamed. Luis looked down at me. He left after saying a single indifferent line. "Luciana, everyone has to be responsible for their actions." Chapter 6. I put my last hope on the homeroom teacher. After all, this matter couldn't rely on conclusive evidence. It depended on subjective judgment. But the homeroom teacher just looked at me reproachfully. "Luciana, What was your purpose in doing this? Was it jealousy because Naomi's grades are better than yours? My throat felt dry in an instant. All my strength seemed to have been drained away. I couldn't say a word. When Luis accompanied Naomi into the office, her eyes were still full of tears. Luciana, weren't we close roommates? I've always treated you as a good friend, and this is how you treat me? She picked up a thick book from the desk and threw it straight at my face. At the same time, she cried out, "You almost ruined my life with a stain because of you. Do you understand?" Luis merely turned his head, looking elsewhere, silent. The homeroom teacher casually scolded Naomi for acting out. Before I could retaliate, she gave me a warning look, then changed the subject. "Luciana, apologize. And I won't cancel your grades or put this on your record. If my grades were canceled, I'd be removed from the honors class in my senior year. But I hadn't done anything. How could I admit it? I'll say it once, I didn't frame Naomi for cheating." As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt a coolness in my nose. Naomi had hit me hard enough to make my nose bleed. Ignoring the varied expressions of the three in front of me, I turned and left. "Stop." Luis chased after me, blocking my path. He frowned at the sight of my nosebleed, but his words were full of blame. "Luciana, you must apologize to Naomi. She shouldn't have to bear this reputation because of you." I lightly wiped the blood from my nose, showing it to him, in a very soft voice. I said, "Luis, can I at least go wash up first?" I felt exhausted, like someone hanging on the edge of a cliff, with no strength left to grip that last branch for survival. I didn't even want to argue with him anymore. Luis frowned deeply. "I'll take you." As he spoke, he reached out to pull me. I stepped back slightly, looking down without any emotion. "Luis, I beg you, stay far away from me." Chapter 7. In the end, I never apologized to Naomi, but it seemed everyone had accepted that I was the one who framed Naomi. The classmates who had always ignored me began to talk behind my back. The paper that was 27 points higher than usual was deemed invalid. My seemingly stable emotions were on the verge of collapsing. It happened during the school-organized spring outing. No one was allowed to be absent without a valid reason, so it became another opportunity for Naomi to set me up. "Naomi and Luciana, you two go gather firewood." After entering the dense woods, Naomi showed her true nature. Without a word, I discreetly pressed the recording button on the device in my bag. "Luciana, it must hurt having your childhood sweetheart taken away, right?" She stood behind me, relaxed and unhurried. I guided her words. "So, you deliberately planted that cheat sheet on me, just so Luis would hate me completely and stop me from taking him back?" She looked around, then smiled. "Yes. No one believes you're innocent. And how about that book hitting your face? That must have hurt, right?" Having gathered the information I needed, I had no intention of prolonging the conversation. With this recording, she would be completely disgraced, with her records tarnished and reassigned to a different class. But she wasn't satisfied yet. Just as I turned, she suddenly gave me a hard shove. "Ah." As I rolled down the slope, Naomi, who got carried away, twisted her ankle and rolled down with me. We ended up hanging onto the trunk of a tree on the slope, barely hanging on. Chapter 8. I tried to save myself, but it was useless. Luis probably heard Naomi's cries for help and was the first to arrive. "Luis, I'm so scared." She looked at Luis with a pitiful expression. The boy's gaze turned to me, filled with helplessness. "Sorry, Luciana." He reached out to Naomi. "Naomi, once you're up, I'll pull you up right away." Naomi paused at his words. She climbed up with Luis's help. I pressed my lips together. "Okay. Thank you." I had nothing to complain about. Naomi was his girlfriend. It was only right that he saved her first. Even being willing to save me at all was beyond my expectations. I thought he wouldn't take the risk and would just go back to get the homeroom teacher. But during Naomi's climb, she suddenly stepped on my hand. She ground it back and forth, using the other foot to gain strength, acting as if she unintentionally stepped on me. The pain made me instinctively let go, and I rolled down the slope. "Luciana! Lucy!" Their voices echoed in my ears. Even now, Naomi didn't forget to complete the act. Luckily, there were enough leaves below, and the slope wasn't too steep. I eventually hit a tree with my back, which stopped me. My body was covered in bruises and scratches of all sizes. The only serious injury was where my back hit the tree. After slowly standing up with the support of the tree, I realized the biggest problem: I was lost, and there was no cell service. Meanwhile, on the other side, Naomi was doing her utmost to stop anyone from rescuing me. Chapter 9. In the end, I stumbled my way out of the woods using the compass on my phone. But when I returned to the gathering place, I found that everyone had left. I paused mid-action as I was about to call the homeroom teacher. With a cold laugh, I instead called my parents. The injuries weren't too serious, but I still needed to be kept in the hospital for observation for a day. Luis came into the hospital room after my parents left for home that night. Luciana, his voice was slightly hoarse. At that moment, I was staring blankly out at the dark sky outside the window. Luis. From the corner of my eye, I saw him approaching. I spoke slowly. Today, while I was trying to find my way out of the woods, I suddenly remembered that time in 8th grade when we went to Forest Park in the fall. I paused, then looked at him. Do you remember? His expression was blank, clearly not remembering. Without any emotion, I continued speaking to him, like an onlooker recounting someone else's love story, calm and detached. That time, I was bitten by a snake. Even though you knew it wasn't venomous, you still immediately carried me to the hospital. It was so hot back then, and you were covered in sweat. But you never put me down, because you knew I was scared of the pain. At that time, I was lying on your back thinking. I sighed lightly. I really liked you, Luis. How could a person change so quickly? Why did my childhood friend, who used to care for me in every possible way, always putting me first, now point at me and say he was disgusted? Why would he allow others to hit me, even when my life was in danger? Why did he stand by and watch? Luis's eyes were filled with regret. He couldn't justify himself. He just kept apologizing. I was wrong, Luciana. I was really wrong. Please forgive me. I won't leave you alone again. I took a deep breath. Looking at the boy in front of me, I raised my hand and slapped him. Luis, how dare you ask me for forgiveness? I stared at him. You saved Naomi first because she's your girlfriend. I have no right to blame you. But you knew I was in danger after falling down. Even if we hadn't known each other for more than 10 years and were just regular classmates, couldn't you have at least gone and informed the homeroom teacher or called the police? You're as cold-blooded as an animal. What if I hadn't made it out of the woods? I might never have gotten the chance to hear these worthless words from him. Luis seemed to collapse. Unable to stand, he squatted beside my bed, reaching to hold my hand. His voice trembled, and his dark eyes were full of pain. I'm sorry, Luciana. I forgot. I really forgot. At that time, Naomi's situation seemed urgent. I tugged at my dry lips, avoiding his touch. How urgent could she be, when she hadn't even fallen? Get lost. Luis didn't move, just looked at me pleadingly. My gaze fell on the glass next to me, and then Naomi opened the door to the hospital room. She looked worse than me, the one who had rolled down a hill, sitting in a wheelchair, with a sickly face. Luciana, please don't blame Luis. Her eyes were slightly red, on the verge of tears. At that time, my ankle was twisted, and I was so afraid of the pain that I could only beg Luis to take me to the hospital first. Right. That was her urgent situation. Sorry. I thought my boyfriend could put me first anytime, anywhere. Forgetting that Luis is different, he also has you, his childhood friend. I was too selfish. With those words, she choked up as she tried to stand. Just before she fell, Luis rushed over to catch her, then placed her back in the wheelchair. When he turned back to look at me, I suddenly lost control. I collapsed emotionally, throwing whatever I could grab at the two of them. Luis shielded Naomi. His forehead was hit, blood oozing out. Get out. If I have to look at the two of you for another second. I glared at them, speaking each word clearly. You both make me sick. Naomi, ever so considerate, pulled on Luis's sleeve and prepared to leave. Luis looked at me, wordlessly. For a long time, before they opened the door to leave, I suddenly spoke. Naomi. The figure in the wheelchair paused, before falling down the slope. You gave me a gift. I stared intently at her back, my hand unconsciously clenching the bedsheet. Trembling. I will definitely make good use of it. She paused for only a second before leaving as if nothing had happened. In Naomi's mind, everything she did was flawless, and since she had always gotten away unscathed, she inevitably became complacent. So she didn't take my words to heart. She even sent me a pre-recorded video to taunt me right after leaving. She must have set up the camera in advance to secretly record it. Naomi had merely twisted her ankle, but Luis, worried she might have other injuries, insisted on keeping her in the hospital for observation for a day. In the video, Naomi clung to Luis's waist. Her voice softened. Do you blame me for not letting you save Luciana sooner? Luis patted her head, sighing softly. No. Naomi hugged him even tighter. Because you're my boyfriend. When I'm scared, you're the one I turn to. I thought I was the most important person to you. In the blurry video, Luis's voice was crystal clear in the hospital room. Naomi, you are the most important person to me. As soon as he finished, he cupped her chin and leaned in to kiss her. This video was followed by a message. And that's why Luis didn't come down the hill to find you. My eyes lost focus slightly, and I turned off my phone, distracted. I thought, what was I doing when the two of them kissed? Oh, I was being cautious, trying to avoid getting bitten by a snake, enduring the pain in my body, step by step, making my way out of the woods by myself. The wind that evening was particularly cold. Chapter 10. Although I had the recording, which was enough to prove that Naomi was the one behind the cheating, the tricky part was that Naomi had indeed pushed me down the slope, but I had no evidence to prove it. In my opinion, the recording alone was trivial, as I hesitated over whether to hand over the recording. My classmate Lily approached me. It was during free activity time after returning to school. She walked over to me when no one was paying attention. Luciana. I saw everything. I looked up at her. She said, that day, I wanted to go somewhere private to use the bathroom, and I happened to see Naomi push you, and she lied to the homeroom teacher, which is why no one came to rescue you. Seeing that I didn't respond, she looked a little embarrassed and slowly explained. I didn't dare to speak up right away, just in case you really died there with no evidence. I was afraid Naomi would come after me. It was understandable. After all, if she dared to push me down, it showed how lightly she regarded a human life. I continued to coax her calmly. Seeing it doesn't help. Eyewitness testimony isn't enough to convict her. Lily glanced around, hesitating to speak. I waited quietly. Luciana, your family has money. If I give you evidence, can you make sure she really ends up in jail? She pressed her lips tightly, looking scared. Because if she doesn't end up there, I'm scared she'll retaliate against me. I nodded, then suddenly smiled. Did you know that Naomi turned 18? This meant that even the law couldn't go easy on her anymore. Lily finally relaxed. She took out her phone and showed me the video. From her angle, you could clearly see Naomi deliberately pushing me. As for Naomi lying to the homeroom teacher, there were even more witnesses. According to Lily, after Naomi and the others returned, she sent Luis off to get a car to take her to the hospital. Then, when everyone was about to leave to look for me, she stopped them. Teacher, Luciana told me she was feeling unwell, so she left early. I saw her family's car pick her up. The homeroom teacher was skeptical. Then I'll call her parents to confirm. Naomi visibly tensed. Why is there no signal? The homeroom teacher frowned at her phone. Naomi didn't give her a second chance to call. Teacher, don't you believe me? Isn't it normal for Luciana to leave early? After all, her family is so rich. It's normal that she can't adapt to a place like this for an outing, right? When Naomi slandered me that time, I vaguely felt that the homeroom teacher had an inexplicable bias against me, and that she liked Naomi. At first, I thought it was because she liked Naomi's good grades. Now it seemed that wasn't the only reason. She probably resented wealth. Naomi used this mentality, subtly mentioning my background to stir up her discontent. At just the right moment, Naomi cried out in pain, changing the subject. Teacher, my ankle is twisted, and it's really swollen. Could you please contact my parents first? She executed the plan flawlessly, and I completely lost my chance to be rescued. Chapter 11. Naomi was completely finished. But suddenly, I didn't feel like ending her right away. During the Tuesday recess, I sneaked into the broadcast room while no one was paying attention. Facing the mic, I pressed play on the recording. How did it feel when that book hit your face? Did it hurt? Naomi's voice echoed clearly in everyone's ears. Unfortunately, I couldn't see her expression at that moment. Although I was scolded by the dean for this, Naomi's reputation was ruined. No way. Was Naomi really the one who planted the cheat sheet? Oh my god. I always thought she was a goddess of youth. But she's so disgusting? The classmates didn't bother hiding their discussions. I watched as Naomi's face grew paler. Luis also looked troubled. He intercepted me while I was getting hot water. His eyes were full of panic and regret. Luciana, I misunderstood. As I twisted the cap of my cup, I said, if you have something to say it all at once. It took him a long time to speak. Can you forgive me, Luciana? His tone was cautious. Without hesitation, I poured the water on his face. It wasn't very hot, but it was enough to make him look pathetic. Luis, let me just ask you this, if you were me, could you forgive? Luis remained still, allowing me to pour the water. Droplets fell from his hair, and he lowered his eyes with a bitter smile. Do you really hate me now? You don't even want our decade-long friendship anymore? The early spring wind was still bitingly cold, especially for Luis, whose school uniform was soaked through. He shivered from the cold, but stubbornly waited for my answer. Luis, you don't deserve to bring up those 10 years with me. As soon as I finished speaking, the hopeful light in his eyes dimmed instantly. Just as he turned to leave, I heard his faint question behind me. Really? You can't forgive me? How could I? How could I forgive someone whose actions allowed me to completely let go of more than a decade of feelings for a childhood friend in just 2 months? Chapter 12. When Naomi thought it was all over, I sent her another message, luring her to the equipment room. It was a screenshot from one of the videos Lily had sent me. What more do you want? Naomi gritted her teeth, her face pale. It seemed she hadn't had a good few days recently. I held a 6-centimeter thick chinois dictionary, weighing it in my hand. You can slap yourself. Stop when I tell you to, or should I do it? Your choice. Naomi, afraid I'd hold a grudge and exact crazy revenge, swallowed her anger and started slapping herself. The red marks on her face deepened, swelling unevenly. Suddenly, footsteps sounded outside the equipment room. I panicked a bit. 2 girls, alone, one with a swollen, red face. Knowing Naomi's nature, I'd likely end up being accused of school bullying. While I was in a daze, the footsteps drew closer. I looked at the slightly ajar door. Just as I stood there, heart pounding, the door was closed. In other words, the person outside had closed the door for me. A kind act. After Naomi slapped herself until her nose bled, I told her to stop. Please. She moved her lips slightly, afraid to touch the wounds. Don't give the video to the police. I still want to take the college entrance exam. I chuckled softly, amused at her absurdity. I pushed open the door and left. Finished? A small voice startled me. The kind soul who had helped close the door was Lily, who happened to pass by. I watched for you. No one saw you hit her. I didn't hit her. From the beginning, I had planned not to lay a hand on her. If Naomi slapped herself, then there would be no responsibility pinned on me. Thanks. I nodded to her and was about to leave. Luciana. She looked hesitant. A few seconds later, she shoved the milk tea in her hand into mine without giving me a chance to refuse. Sorry. I didn't know the truth before and joined in isolating you. She spoke quickly. One long breath. If you have any questions about studying, you can come to me, or if you need help with anything else. See you. With that, she ran off without looking back. I stared at the warm milk tea in my hand, stunned. This was the first act of kindness I had received since being isolated. Chapter 13. That afternoon after school, I took the video to the police station. I stood at the school gate, watching Naomi being taken away by the police. She cried out, "Please don't take me away. I'm about to take my college entrance exams. Please, at least let me finish the exams, okay?" The police car slowly shrank in my view, then disappeared. I couldn't help but think of the time Naomi even surpassed Luis, becoming the top student in the grade. I remember how her eyes were filled with starlight back then. At the same time, the homeroom teacher wasn't spared either. Her irresponsibility, her strong bias against students, her inability to tell right from wrong. In the end, she had to pay the price. Before she was dismissed, she came to see me, hoping I could issue a letter of forgiveness. For what? I couldn't help but feel disgusted. Letting someone like you continue teaching is an act of irresponsibility for any school. People like you should be trampled underfoot like an ant by those they resent the most. Humiliated and submissive, as you deserve. The class got a new homeroom teacher. Only then did everyone gradually realize that they had misunderstood me. They began to strike up conversations, asking if I wanted to join them for a meal, but I found myself not fitting in anymore. It wasn't pretentiousness. I had just gotten used to being alone. I convinced myself that being alone had its perks, but as I gradually got used to being alone, I had to adapt to this renewed liveliness. I couldn't help but feel a sense of exclusion. So when the class president asked me again if I wanted to join the class dinner, I thought about it and shook my head in refusal. But not all group activities could be refused. For example, the cultural committee representative had signed us up for a group choir without consulting us. At the time, I didn't expect it either. That I, who was isolated just 2 months ago, would now become popular. Chapter 14. On the day of the art festival, after changing into my costume, I hesitated for a long time before coming out of the bathroom. The costume size seemed off. The top was a bit too short. If I raised my arms even slightly, my waist would be exposed. Luis had recently been cooperating with the police investigation intermittently, so he hadn't been coming to school much. I stopped, frowning. What do you want now? Although Luis hadn't committed any actual crime, given his involvement in every incident, he was given a demerit. Luis didn't seem to care about my hostility, his gaze deepening. I broke up with Naomi. Before, I didn't know she had done so many wrong things. I was about to speak, but he cut me off. "I know you hate me." He pulled his lips into a self-deprecating smile. "I just wanted to explain today that I really didn't know about the things she did before. Believe it or not, Luciana, I've never meant any harm towards you. If it weren't for Naomi stirring things up." He leaned weakly against the wall, shaking his head with a bitter smile. "We wouldn't have ended up like this. Luis, you're truly rotten now." I rubbed my forehead in exhaustion, shifting all the blame onto Naomi. "Can you really be at peace? Did someone force you to be with her?" Luis looked up, meeting my gaze. Helplessness filled him entirely. "So what should I do, Luciana? I really don't know what to do anymore to make you stop rejecting me." His gaze suddenly turned dark, his expression unreadable. "I don't even know what's happening to me, Luciana. I think I might." I couldn't bear to listen any longer. Before going on stage, I unintentionally raised my arm, revealing a bit of my waist, which someone managed to capture. The photo was then posted on the campus confession wall. "This girl is totally my type. Can someone give me her contact info? Oh wow, she looks amazing. What a waist. I'd love her contact too. Aw, I've seen her. She's in the class that's performing right now." The post's popularity started to grow. When I returned backstage, I found myself cornered and only then realized what was going on. "Hey, can I get your contact information?" A boy with slightly red ears, nudged forward by several other boys, looked awkward, feeling baffled. I was about to refuse when Luis made his way through the crowd to me. "Luciana, congratulations on your performance." A smile tugged at his lips as he shoved a bouquet of flowers into my arms. "Who's this guy?" I heard the whispers of onlookers. "No idea, but he looks like Luciana's boyfriend." The voice wasn't too low, at least both Luis and I could hear it clearly. And someone even asked aloud, "Dude, is she your girlfriend?" The boy gestured at me, asking Luis. He didn't deny it, just raised an eyebrow. "So don't bother asking for her contact info." I found it amusing. I stepped forward and threw the bouquet back at Luis. "I have nothing to do with him," leaving those words behind. I ignored Luis's darkened expression and walked away. Chapter 15. But it seemed like he just wouldn't leave me alone. After school in the evening, he followed me all the way. "Luciana, we did have an engagement when we were young. I didn't deny it today, just to stop them from spreading your WeChat around." I looked at him for 2 seconds, suddenly realizing that he still hadn't understood he was wrong. "Luis, do you remember the marriage letter you wrote to me when we were kids?" I turned my head, my gaze resting somewhere else. My voice had no emotion, and under the suddenly dropping temperature, my tone seemed cold as well. We were young, and although I didn't understand what marriage meant, I knew that it would mean I could always be with Brother Luis, and it made me feel secure. I looked again at the boy in front of me, whose eyes were reddening. "Because you said Brother Luis would always protect me, but you went back on your word, on the engagement you proposed, and did nothing to protect me." Luis collapsed, crouching at my feet, his hands gripped mine tightly. "Stop, Luciana, I've done so many things wrong." I slowly pulled my hand away, looking down at him. "Yes, you did. The harm you caused me is irreversible, Luis. I will never forgive you in this lifetime. So please, stop clinging to me." In the end, he didn't agree that day. He only said, as he was leaving, that he thought he had liked the wrong person. When I got home, I suddenly remembered that the marriage letter hadn't been thrown away yet. I searched high and low, found it, and without a second glance, tore it up and threw it in the garbage downstairs. In the following period, Luis didn't bother me again, but since we were in the same class, I would always catch him staring at me whenever I looked back. I looked at the college entrance exam countdown on the board, pushing down the irritation. I tried not to provoke him again. Chapter 16. Although I hadn't given my WeChat to that boy, he still showed up in our class occasionally during break, bringing me snacks, and I had no choice but to return them, wasting the entire break. Later, my constant avoidance must have really frustrated him. One day after school, he confessed to me in front of the school gate. His determined expression, paired with the corny setup of the confession, made it feel like he was forcing me. "Sorry." My tone was strictly formal. "I don't Lee. She doesn't like you. Haven't you had enough?" With such a big scene, there was no way Luis wouldn't notice. He had a thin layer of hostility on his face today. The boy turned back, confused. To look at him. "What does it have to do with you?" Luis sneered, walking over and punching him, making him stagger back. "It has everything to do with me." And with that, the two started fighting, with the upcoming college entrance exams and the pressure building, and Luis's occasional harassment. It was suffocating me. Before the fight escalated, they both stopped and managed to avoid getting the police involved. But my irritation had reached its peak. On the empty street, Luis stood in front of me like someone who had done something wrong, with his head lowered. "I didn't mean to bother you, Luciana. I knew you didn't like him. I just wanted to help you get rid of him." "Luis!" My voice was involuntarily raised. "Please stop doing all these meaningless things. You're only making my life harder now. Don't you get it? You weren't there when I was being bullied before, and now it's even more unnecessary." He stayed silent for a long time before finally speaking the same empty apology again. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of his bag. "After you threw it away." I picked it up and pieced it back together. The marriage letter was covered in layer upon layer of tape. His voice was choked, and his hands trembled. "You promised that when you grew up, you would marry only me." I barely remembered what happened that day. All I recalled was how infuriated I was at Luis for being so stubborn and refusing to listen. I seemed to have yelled at him for a long time and slapped him several times. In the end, I crouched by the side of the road, crying, begging him not to bother me anymore. The marriage letter he painstakingly pieced back together was once again torn to shreds by me. And Luis, he really never appeared before me again. His parents asked for a leave of absence for him the next day, saying he would study at home for the remaining month. Although I was a little surprised, I was more relieved. It wasn't until after the college entrance exams that I heard about Luis from my parents. That night, on his way back home, he got into a car accident because he was distracted. Originally, with active treatment, he might have been able to get discharged and make it in time for the exams, but he was so uncooperative that he wouldn't even take his medicine. His mom even called mine before the exams, hoping I could try to persuade him. After hearing this, my dad grabbed the phone. The college entrance exam is about his future. If he wants to ruin it, don't drag my daughter into it. Clearly, the anger from the broken engagement still hadn't subsided. Because of my extraordinary performance, I made it into a 211 university. On the day I received my acceptance letter, I also received a message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your success. It was just an impersonal phrase, but I immediately knew it was from Luis. I felt nothing and blocked the number without hesitation, breathing in the stifling hot air. My heart, however, was exceptionally calm. In my mind, it was as if a movie was playing, replaying the ups and downs of the past 6 months, frame by frame. Finally, it ended when I put down my pen on my last exam on the 8th. Some people got what they deserved. Some regretted too late, and I got the outcome I deserved. Holding my acceptance letter, I looked towards the direction of my future university. I knew my life was just beginning.